I'll be honest with you, this year so far has been a big struggle for me. It's only been 2 months and it feels like about 2 years. The level of isolation that I've been experiencing is beyond anything I think I've ever had in my entire life. I've never gone this long without seeing other people, and I've never spent so few cumulative hours in the week in the company of other people. And I know that many other people are experiencing this too. I know that many other people are either living alone or just feeling very isolated anyway. Not everybody lives with a partner or somebody that they love and trust and feel safe and comfortable with. And that must be really hard too. The snow that you're looking at right now is from January. We occasionally get snow in March. We are in much milder weather now. It's heading towards weather where you can feasibly sit outside for long stretches unless it's raining, which is going to be a really huge turning point in this phase of the pandemic. In my own situation, I have a bit of a triple whammy that is causing this level of isolation for me at the moment in this pandemic. I am single, I live alone, and I also don't have a lot of friends yet here in Ireland. I lived abroad for 4 years and I came back to Ireland only 6 months before the pandemic hit, before we went into lockdown. In fact, almost 6 months to the day before we went into lockdown. And I made the mistake of not prioritising making new connections. I focused more on rebuilding the friendships with the people that I already had in this city. I had mainly three friends and a handful more. And I mostly focused on those 3 people, and particularly on one person who, unfortunately for me, is now living in a completely different county, and we might not see each other for a long, long time yet. It's not that I wasn't making any effort at all. I definitely was. I was occasionally going for coffee or lunch with people I hadn't seen in years or new friends of friends. I was slowly but surely starting to build up a new network for myself. But of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, it felt as though, nobody was going to be prioritizing socializing with people that weren't in their inner circle. And also a lot of those people live outside of my 5-kilometre bubble. Anyway, I don't live within 5 kilometres of the city centre, and 5 kilometres right now, or 3 miles, is as far as we're allowed to go. We're not allowed to go further from our house. All of this isolation that I'm experiencing as a result of these factors has been really impacting my motivation, and it's been impacting my creativity. I have found it really hard to get enthusiastic about things enough to come up with content to create, enough to actually write anything down or come up with new ideas. It's been difficult, and I know that I'm not alone in this. I think especially at a high level of lockdown, which is what we're in Ireland at the moment and have been for months. I mean, essentially in Dublin, we've been locked down. I've personally anyway been pretty much locked down since mid-October, and we had a few weeks break, but I was isolating to meet my parents, so I didn't have that break. And I don't think this is unusual to have this lack of motivation, this lack of enthusiasm for life, this just lack of ability to come up with new things and be able to contribute to the world. So I thought that what I might do is talk to you about what I'm experiencing, talk about this isolation and the ways that I've been coping with it, the things that I've been thinking around these 3 different factors, and hopefully this might be helpful to somebody out there, or at least that you might feel less alone in your loneliness. So I'm not going to talk a huge amount about the being single issue. All of the anxieties that I have around that pretty much link in with my lack of a social circle anxieties too, and they go very much hand in hand. I think you'll all probably realise that yourselves, and you'll have noticed in your own lives. I mean, it stands to reason that if you've got a lot of different contacts, a lot of different friends, diverse friend groups, and a vibrant social life, obviously you're much more likely to be in and out of relationships, to not be single, to be dating lots of people. Whereas if your network is small, it's obviously going to be much harder to meet people unless you're really digging into the online dating. So I think those 2 things go hand in hand, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much. But it's not something I've talked about much on the channel, and it's not something that I really tend to consider to be an area of my life that I ever want to talk about online. Obviously, a large part of this is because I don't want to be talking about other people in my life. I don't want to be invading other people's privacy by talking about their situations. But if you've been following me for long enough, then you probably know that I have been single pretty much entirely, maybe not entirely unattached, but certainly not in a serious relationship for the past 3 years. You know, there have been various reasons for that. I haven't really been trying. I wasn't putting myself out there, at least for a year of that. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. Of course, do I wish I could go back in time and reprioritize and not pretty much just decide to be single for a year right before the pandemic? Yes, of course. It would have been much nicer, of course, to be in a relationship right now. Maybe it would have been difficult if we couldn't see each other much, but it certainly would have been a huge comfort. And then I wouldn't be having to deal with this added anxiety on top of everything of being a woman in her 30s who does hope at some point to have a child, who is single in a pandemic and with this uncertainty about when I actually might be able to meaningfully start dating again. And that's really the only issue that I want to bring up in this video, because I think a lot of you will be able to resonate with this if you are single yourselves. There is this anxiety now about having lost huge amounts of time, huge amounts of dating time, and this uncertainty about what our social world is going to look like. Even after all of this, even after we're vaccinated, even after lockdowns lift, it's a bit unsure and unclear. And I know from myself, I've almost started to forget what it feels like to be living a normal life. And I forget sometimes how many different humans I come in contact with in normal life, and how it is entirely possible to walk into a shop or a cafe and meet someone and get talking to them. That kind of reality has completely evaporated from my brain, almost as if it never happened. And it's easy then to get very pessimistic and to start thinking, well, is my life really going to change that much after everything lifts? What if lockdown lifts and I'm vaccinated and I'm able to meet people again, but I don't have anyone to meet, or it doesn't work and I still am struggling to meet anybody? And I think that probably goes as well for just people who are feeling lonely, feeling as though they don't have as many friends as they wish they did. I would be curious if this pandemic experience is maybe making people realise that they don't have as many friends as they thought they did, or that their quality of friendships is not as strong as they thought it was. I think this experience is making we are looking internally a lot, where we're assessing our lives a lot. And when everything changes, we really start to notice what is and isn't in our lives. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are feeling dissatisfied with their social lives and many other areas of their lives as well. And that's something that I can't obviously give you an answer on, but the way that I try to alleviate those anxieties in myself when I start to worry about, what if everything goes, quote, back to normal, unquote, and nothing changes and I still don't make any friends and I'm left feeling even more despairing because there's actually nothing stopping me, but I'm struggling to change my life. What I try to remind myself is that, like I said, in your day-to-day life, you actually do encounter quite a large number of other humans. If you're moving about a city, even a town, if you're going into shops, cafes, libraries, if you are going to yoga classes, language classes, art classes, galleries, pubs, restaurants, events, you get my point. You're constantly interacting with other humans, you're constantly meeting other people, and I think the trick is probably in making the most of every opportunity, every social opportunity that you have, striking up a conversation, even if it's a tiny conversation. And I really don't want to be encouraging anyone to be hassling strangers, because that's not cool either, and you don't want to be trying to force a conversation with somebody who's not willing to have one. But I feel as though many people are willing to have a conversation with you if you strike it up, and especially if you don't have any agenda, or if you're not trying to push anything on anyone, if you're just wanting to be friendly in general. My theory anyway is that this is going to transform your sense of how hard it is to make friends, and how many people are actually out there in the world waiting for you to meet them. And that's going to be my strategy. My strategy is very much going to be, that I have to start putting myself out into the world amongst other humans, as much as I am comfortable to do. And not only that, but to make use of those experiences. I mean, how many times have I gone to a yoga class but not struck up a conversation with anybody there, not even made an effort to do so? And some of it is just out of a fear of being rejected, out of a fear of people looking at you funny and thinking, oh, why is she talking to me? I don't really feel like talking to her. And that is the kind of attitude that I really want to lose after all of this. I really want to lean into a lack of embarrassment and just a complete lack of shame around being friendly to other people and trying to strike up connections with other people as much as humanly possible. And I think that a lot of other people are going to be in the same boat. I think a lot of people are going to be in that mood, and we might as well make the most of it. I wanted to talk a little bit about living alone as well, for those of you who are living alone or just not having the amount of human interaction that you normally would, and that you're really struggling with that and suffering with that. And I think there are a few different techniques that I have almost unconsciously used to make myself feel less lonely in this time. One of the things, and I might have mentioned this before on the channel, one of the things that I have really gotten into the habit of doing is listening to a lot more podcasts and YouTube videos while I go about my day, while I do chores, while I go through my morning routine. I like to have a voice on in the background, whether it could be a radio, it could be anything. And originally I was thinking of this as this is an enjoyable thing, to be learning something or to be entertained in some way. And after a while I started to realize it really doesn't even matter what's in the background, just that it's a friendly voice that I can relate to in some way, and that parasocial relationships essentially have become very important in my life. And I try to not let myself rely too much on those parasocial relationships, because they're not giving you everything that you need. Obviously, a one-sided voice just speaking at you isn't going to give you all of your social need, but it definitely takes the edge off the loneliness. I have definitely gone through phases of wanting to reduce the amount of content that I'm consuming. I've wanted to maybe give myself more silence, more alone time, more time to be creative rather than to be consuming content. But I feel that right now is not the time to do that. And similarly, I considered quitting my Netflix subscription at the beginning of the year, watching less TV. And again, I started to realize over time that if I were to do that, I would probably start to feel a lot lonelier, even lonelier, because I would be lacking that outlet. It is an outlet. Those parasocial relationships are outlets, whether it's somebody on YouTube that you can relate to and that feels a little bit like a friend, even though they don't know you, they don't even know you exist. And even a TV show can have a similar effect, because you start relating to the characters and they start to feel like real people in your life to some degree. And it might sound strange and lonely, but we're in strange and lonely times. And yeah, leaning into the parasocial relationships has been it's been the key thing for how I just keep myself going on a day-to-day basis. The second thing really is just making sure that I do actually either Skype or Zoom or just have a phone call with people. I've definitely noticed that people are maybe less willing to be on Zoom all the time as they were at the beginning of the pandemic. I think we've all gotten really sick of Zoom. We've gotten really sick of sitting staring at a screen all day. And the old-fashioned phone call is a good remedy for that, because you're not having to stare at a screen. And it's not quite as satisfying socially as a face-to-face interaction. There is a reason that things like Zoom and Skype are as wonderful as they are. Like, they really do give you a second best to an in-person interaction. But I find phone calls to sometimes even feel more intimate. There's something about the way that you connect with another person when you're not staring straight into their face that is more relaxing sometimes. I mean, when you think about the way that we interact with people in person, we don't tend to stare into each other's faces the entire time. Staring into each other's face is a very intense way to socialize with another person. We don't even always tend to sit facing one another the entire time when we're hanging out. The natural thing, or my natural inclination, tends to be to sit a little bit off to the side, and you glance at the person's face every now and then. You keep them in your line of vision, but you're not necessarily staring at them. So sometimes that feeling of looking off to another direction while the person's voice is in your ear is actually, it can emulate that sense of in-person interaction, I think, more in some ways than sitting staring at a screen where you're sort of having to keep watching their face to, I don't know what it is. There's something where you feel like you have to be fixated on the screen at all times when you are on a video call. So yeah, those have been my main ways of coping. I hope that this was helpful to somebody. I hope that if nothing else, that you feel less alone by hearing me opening up about how much I have been struggling. And yeah, this is honestly a large part of why I have been on and off with YouTube videos and on and off with social media, and it's not always easy to turn the camera on, and that's why I didn't face the camera today. I just couldn't face it, honestly. So it's voice only from me for today. But thanks for watching. I hope you're all doing well. I hope that things are starting to turn around where you are too, because things are starting to seem more hopeful here in Ireland, which is good. I will talk to you again soon.